The third and final generation of the Mercedes SLK, coded R172, began production in 2011 once the car was shown to the world at the Geneva Motor Show of that year. This was the first and only generation to have its name changed. While most of you will still know the car as the SLK, the facelift models, released in December 2015, were renamed the SLC to fit Mercedes' new lineup of names, which would last until production ends in 2020. For the enthusiast market, the renaming brings a second shift. The SLK55 AMG retained a V8 wedged under the bonnet for the early years, but the SLC43 AMG ditches an old school 8 and instead gets a twin-turbo V6. For ease of the guide, I'll refer to the car as the SLK throughout, unless there is something specific to the SLC model. While the SLK doesn't quite get as much attention as the BMW Z4 and Porsche Boxster, there is a dedicated following, and Mercedes stayed true to the first and second generation styling, but adapted the front to suit the new family look of the brand, taking the squared front and angular design of the CLS Coupe Saloon. Similar to both previous SLK models, the platform underneath the SLK is a revised version of the C-Class. Sales were strongest in the first sales year. For many of you, this will be the model year of 2012, sold in 2011 and into 2012. While a second minor revision in 2014 to boost standard equipment level encouraged sales, in fact 2014 was a great year for the brand. In some markets the SLK outsold the Audi TT and Porsche Boxster 2-1, but this was the last year it would achieve that. The facelift did encourage new buyers, but after 2017 the SLC model starts its journey to a peaceful goodnight. Mercedes officially axing the model entirely in 2020 after making it clear in 2019 that a follow-up would be unlikely, at least one that isn't a reimagined future EV. A sign of just how much change occurred at Mercedes during the third-gen SLK is the introduction of the first diesel model. Released in 2012, when diesel sales seemed to be on a never-ending high, it was popular with company buyers in Europe that gained a tax break for the lower CO2 figure, but didn't gain enough traction to get more than a single iteration, and became a factory order only after the initial interest passed. If you love the SLK and everything it represented for so many years, the small roadster always offering an alternative to the sportier setup of competitors so you could have your weekend drive in style and comfort rather than adrenaline and sweat, then there is a final hurrah. In 2020, the SLC Final Edition splashed yellow paint, all the trimmings, and comes in 3 flavours: an entry 200 model, higher power 300 model, or for the lucky few, 43 AMG model. To put it mildly, sales are rare, but they are out there if you're patient and diligent in your searching. Moving on to safety, and the SLK was not tested by any of the main European or North American testing facilities. However, the C-Class on which the chassis is derived from did score top marks in both continents. Next up are the common faults, and a reminder to add a like to the video if it's useful, as this increases its chance of being shown to other people like yourself, and if you want to see more videos like this one, then consider subscribing for more. The first is an imperative check for all of you that view a red car, specifically a paint called Fire Opal Red. The paint is known to micro blister, with the worst affected areas being the boot or trunk and front wings or fenders. Mercedes will almost always decline a warranty claim on the bumpers as they are plastic and sprayed in a separate facility, which Mercedes believe doesn't have the problem. On viewing, study a car carefully for paint blisters. If you don't have the sharpest of eyes, take someone with you who does, or pay for a car detailer's time to view the car with you, as it will be much cheaper than buying one with the issue. Most paint shops will advise a complete respray, as their eagle eyes and strong light will likely find the problem affecting every panel in different severity. Mercedes were generally good in warranty claims for all but the bumpers, but the car will need a full Mercedes history and an inspection to prove it has not had a previous respray. And it will be away for an extended period of time. Some owners were without a car for over a month after waiting a year for a paint shop to have availability. While you're checking the paint, inspect the wheels. Some designs are known to suffer from corrosion at around the 8-year mark. A full repair should be factored into the sale price or negotiated into the deal. On a test drive, find some twisty bends in the road and throw the car in with a bit of speed. It should feel more responsive than an A-Class or C-Class model, but not as sharp as the Mazda MX-5. If it feels a bit loose or the handling is dull, then the anti-roll bar bushes have likely failed. When viewing, get the car roof up and down several times, and make sure you view it close at least once from outside the car with the help of either the seller or a companion. There is a tolerance factor in the roof alignment, and so it may still close if it's starting to run away from its true position. A repair will either be with some swearing and bruised knuckles over a weekend, or a lighter purse after a few days at a specialist. Check around the seals on both front windows for any signs of pinching. If the roof has trapped a seal a few times or been left closed all winter while pushing down on a seal, it will be misshapen and allow a small air leak. This should be audible on test drive when the radio and air conditioning is off. The sound will rise in pitch at higher speeds. A new seal should solve the issue, although it's worth double checking the seal didn't fail due to a misalignment of the roof. Note that parts can be quite expensive on the SLC model and the SLK, but while the platform share with the C-Class makes some parts easy and cost-effective to come by, many others aren't. This seems a larger issue in the USA and Canada than it is in Europe, with the Aussie and New Zealanders getting the highest prices for everyday maintenance items overall, but by a slim margin. However, regular maintenance can be reasonable on the non-AMG models, especially if the car is a second vehicle. A top tip is if the car is approaching or has passed 60,000 miles or 100,000 kilometers, to look for a recent A service. These cars get alternating A and B servicing, with A being more expensive. The 60,000 mile service includes several ancillary service items and a gearbox service, which makes it expensive. A transmission cooling warning will likely be the first sign of either fluid that has deteriorated out of specification, or if after a recent service, then either wrong specification or the wrong amount of gearbox fluid is the likely culprit. As much as this list may sound scary, I will note that as ever with these guides, there were countless happy owners that have experienced minor issues, but not huge bills. Moving on to the recalls, and a reminder to add your ownership experience in the comments to help others with their buying experience. In 2013, there was a recall for the fuel filter housing across several engines as cracking was discovered on the factory item. In 2014, there was a recall for the airbag module on a 2-month run of cars from 2014. This will vary slightly between countries, but between deliveries will be a 2-month period in the first half of the year. A series of very limited recalls were announced for a small number of cars in 2016, one for the ignition lock and the other for the wrong wheel nuts on the rear from factory. These were isolated occurrences. A 2017 recall was announced to recalibrate the ESP system on cars from mid-2015 to the end of 2016 after they were found to stick on when operated by an automated system like the cruise control. Next up are the engines, and I'll start with the smallest and move up in size, but a quick note on gearboxes. Different markets were offered slight variations, but a 6-speed manual is offered on some cars. For the rest, it's either a 5 or 7-speed automatic and a 9-speed automatic on the SLC model. The smallest engine is a 1.6 turbo on the SLC 180 model from 2015. This engine, coded M274, is also fitted in the SLC 200 and SLC 300, but as a 2-litre, so we'll cover all of these three options here. The 1.6 gets 154 brake horsepower, and the 2-litre has 181 brake horsepower, or 242 brake horsepower, and the 2-litre has either 181 or 242 brake horsepower. The 180 and 200 have a manual gearbox as standard in most markets. Fuel economy is rated at 38.7 miles per gallon, or 7.3 litres per 100 kilometres on the newer WLTP test cycle. If looking at a model that has over 60,000 miles or 100,000 kilometres and is an early car, especially if built in 2014, then listen for a noise at idle. It may sound like a tick or clacking. This will likely be camshaft adjusters due to wear. This is a fairly costly job due to the parts and location of a repair. However, a new part is used in the 2015 coded A2700501147, and these are generally better, but not immune to wear. Overall, this isn't a particularly common fault, but one to know about so that you can check for it. The more common fault on this engine is a thermostat failure, and many of the early cars will likely have had this item replaced. I will note that this engine on both the C and E class did have a rare but serious report of number 1 cylinder piston cracking. As far as I could tell, it is extremely rare on the SLC model, and every report I could find was a US registered C class or E class. I also found reports of timing chain issues, but again, none of these were on the SLC model, but the same engine fitted to other cars. For now, I'll say be aware of the problem, but note it doesn't seem to affect the SLC. In the earlier SLK models, there is a 1.8 litre engine fitted to the SLK 200 and SLK 250. This engine is coded M271 and makes 181 brake horsepower in the 200 and 201 brake horsepower in the 250. Fuel economy is averaged at 41.5 miles per gallon, or 6.8 litres per 100 kilometres, on the older and less accurate NEDC test cycle. Listen for any rattling noise or metal chafing sound. The timing chain was a repeated complaint on these engines, but again seems less reported on the SLK, likely because these cars generally get less use. It also seems this engine is sensitive to poor servicing, and while most SLK owners are likely to have been more stringent than someone using the engine to commute in a saloon, it is worth checking. If you see big gaps in the service records, then it may be worth looking at another car, as large bills could be looming. Then there's the 2.1 litre diesel model. Not all of you will have this option, but those that do can get it on the SLK250 CDI or SLC 250D model. Power is rated at 201 brake horsepower, with an average fuel economy rated at 70.6 miles per gallon or 4 litres per 100 kilometres, but don't expect that on a spirited run. The OM651 engine is generally well regarded, and due to its lower sales volume on the SLK and SLC, it's hard to find any negative reports other than servicing costs. Complaints can be found, but they were in other applications and after very high mileage, so while the diesel may not be to everyone's taste, and future resale may be a challenge, it certainly seems to be at least fairly reliable. The 3-litre V6 coded M276 in the SLC43 AMG model is next, and while many will tell you this isn't a true AMG due to its engine, it doesn't mean it isn't an engaging drive, although its relatively poor sales will make it harder to find. You'll have between 362 and 385 brake horsepower, depending on market and year, with official fuel economy at 36.2 miles per gallon or 7.8 litres per 100 kilometres. Overall, people are very positive about the engine's reliability, although the complex two-stage timing chain may be something to keep in mind for the future, but for now, look for a good service record and you should be okay. The 3.5 litre in the SLK350 is also coded M276 and produces 302 brake horsepower with an official average of 39.5 miles per gallon or 7.15 litres per 100 kilometres, although this was done on the older and less accurate NEDT test cycle. This is the model I have the least to say about. Owners report it as reliable, and aside from routine maintenance, it is desirable across the model years. However, note that these are a bit rarer in some markets and have higher demand, so resale values can be quite high. In my research, there was a premium of about 20% over the other non-AMG models. Finally, there is the one that is a standout in Mercedes history along with its predecessor. Usually I do a separate guide for AMG models, but with so few available, I've included them on this guide. The SLK55 AMG has a 5.5 litre V8 coded M152 and is sold between 2012 and 2015 with 416 brake horsepower and an official average of 33.6 miles per gallon or 8.4 litres per 100 kilometres on the older, less accurate NEDC test cycle. Having driven one of these before, they do leave an impression on you, and used values are generally reasonable considering their rarity. However, this is partly due to the running costs and repair costs, as access is tighter than 2 coats of paint, and so additional labour is usually needed compared to smaller motors. Carbon build-up has been reported and will need media blasting at around 60 to 80,000 miles or 100 to 120,000 kilometres. Some owners of other Mercedes models with this engine have found oil leaks to the front and rear main seals, and a rare but very costly timing chain fault gets reported every now and again, although on the SLK these are very uncommon. Some lean running issues do get reported that cause engine issues, but you'd be extremely lucky to get one of these on a car that has meticulous service history. The age of these also helps. Having passed the decade-old mark, the ones that will have had a problem will either have had it rectified or should be easy to spot. But like any performance car that needs top quality attention, a few will be hiding potential bills, so make sure you have a really good look around the engine as best you can for any signs of oil or signs that repair was done in a rush. A bolt not fully tightened or a splash of oil over the top of the engine from careless refills can tell a story that you don't want to be a part of. For our picks, the budget winner is the V8 SLK 350. However, if you have a diesel offered and don't mind the sound, then it could be a great alternative with very competitive running costs. For the top money pick, there's only one. You just won't experience a giant V8 shoehorned in such a small car elsewhere, and the chances of finding such a car again outside of the 6-figure, limited-run specialist car world are near zero. It's a motoring experience worth checking out if you can. If the SLK hasn't tempted you, how about the BMW Z4 or even the Nissan 370Z next?